here to talk about the intersection of the issues that DEMOS really cares deeply about. And they are the failure of governance, on the one hand, the failure of the current model of capitalism, on the other, and the resulting collapse of our environment, our planetary ecosystem. These three things intersect in a way now that is inextricable. You can't take them apart. You can't look at them separately. You can't understand them individually because they are so closely intertwined and they are so dependent on each other, and we can't fix one of these problems without fixing the other two, which makes the process all the more complex. And now, of course, we are in terribly turbulent times, more turbulent than perhaps we've seen in 40 or 50 years. The danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to address the turbulence with the logic of the past. And what Dean Speth has been doing for years is trying to think about a logic for the future. And in this extraordinarily important book, The Bridge at the End of the World, Gus really lays out a very broad critique of the current models of capitalism and the current models of governance and the current demise of social justice and how they are intertwined and how, in fact, they are leading us to a point where we do not have a sustainable future as a society or as a planet. And I think it's a profoundly important work. It's a very challenging work. And when I tell you a little bit more about Gus's biography, you'll understand just how challenging it is. He started out as a lawyer. He was educated at Yale and Yale Law School. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He went on to be one of the co-founders of the Natural Resources Defense Council and served there as the chief attorney in the early 1970s. When Jimmy Carter was elected, he served in the White House, first as a member and later as chairman of the President's Council on Environmental Quality. He left government and then went on to found the World Resources Institute, another extraordinarily accomplished and well-regarded environmental institution that works globally. And then later on, he served as the administrator of the United Nations Development Program from 1993 until 1999, when he became the dean of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale University. So the reason this book is so provocative and challenging is that it takes on the environmental community, and he will tell you why he sees the current approach to environmentalism as a failing approach. It takes on the prevailing wisdom about the market and about capitalism and about the institutions of the market, and it takes on the 30 years that we've just experienced of a politics in this country that has denigrated the role of government. Because he sees that the market failures and the environmental failures and the social justice failures ultimately go back to the democratic failures in our society, and the fact that we don't have robust government, that we don't have robust civic engagement, that we discourage people from participation, and as a result, we are in the mess that we now find ourselves in.
I can't imagine a worse time to be giving the talk that I'm going to give to you today. You will hear my plea in a moment that we move to a post-growth society. And yet here we are ready to just to do anything possible to get growth back on its feet and moving again and restore the growth momentum that we once had. So when I get to that point in my talk, I hope you'll remember that the transition that I'm advocating is one that would in fact grow out of purposeful citizen decision-making and purposeful citizen action, and it would be linked to growing economic security, not a collapse of economic security, and would be linked to empowerment of people. And it wouldn't be in what we now see, which is the result of a collapse of casino capitalism and housing bubbles and all the rest. It's also bad news in another sense, too. We're now all euphoric that our system of electing presidents, our politics, and even maybe electing the Congress has finally worked. But you'll hear shortly the claim that this system is in fact in deep trouble. In my view, it worked for a variety of reasons that don't undermine the conclusion that the system is in deep trouble, including the fact that the winner campaigned to change the system. The talk is based on the book, as Stephen mentioned, and I set out in the book to try to explain a paradox. And the paradox is, how could we have an environmental community working now for decades, since 1970, 40 years, getting stronger and more sophisticated, more money, more members, and we still are losing the environment rapidly, to the point that we're in a real environmental crisis, although not well known, and that is a fundamental paradox that the environmental community, I don't think, has faced up to. So I really want to begin by taking you through some of the hard facts, things that we know about where we stand with regard to environmental degradation. And it's not a pleasant litany, but I feel that it's not well appreciated how serious these issues are, and I want to go through that a little bit. Been measured now, and we know that we've eliminated about half the temperate forest of the planet. We've eliminated about half the tropical forest of the planet, and we're eliminating tropical forest today at a rate of about an acre a second, and have been for decades. We know that half the planet's wetlands are now gone, and over a third of the mangroves. We know that 90% of the large predator fish in the ocean have been eliminated, and that we're overfishing or fishing to capacity about 75% of the ocean's fisheries. That number was just 5% a few decades ago. We know that about 40% of the world's coral is either gone or severely threatened. We know that species are disappearing at a rate of about 1,000 times the rate that species normally disappear. We haven't had such an extinction spasm on the planet since the dinosaurs disappeared 65 million years ago. We're eliminating the agricultural productivity equivalent to that of the state of Nebraska each year on a planetary basis. And probably everybody in this room is carrying around scores of toxic chemicals in our tissues with really unknown but increasingly understood effects, particularly in prenatal and neonatal contexts. We know we severely damaged the Earth's ozone shield without even knowing we were doing it. We've increased the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere dramatically, 33% in the case of carbon dioxide, the principal gas, and started this very dangerous process of global warming and climate disruption. Everywhere we look, the ice fields of the planet are melting today. We know we're fixing nitrogen, making it biologically active at about the same rate that nature normally fixes nitrogen, doubling this cascading of fertilizer through our biological systems. And one result of that is that we've now found hundreds of dead zones in the oceans due to this over-fertilization. We know we're withdrawing about half of the fresh water on the planet for human consumption, destroying aquatic habitats, and in many places around the world, including the United States, running out of water. The following rivers no longer get to the ocean in the dry season anymore: the Colorado, the Yale, the Ganges, the Nile, and others. We also know that even if we just look domestically in the U.S., where we've had strong environmental programs for a long time, we see that the battle is far, far from won. First, we are deeply complicit in the global trends that I just listed for you. We also know that we're losing, get this, an estimated 6,000 acres a day of open space in the United States, about 100,000 acres a year of our precious wetlands, the most productive systems. The estimate from the best group that we have looking at these issues in the U.S., NatureServe, is that we are about 30% of the species in the United States are threatened with extinction. Half of our lakes and a third of our streams no longer do not meet the water quality standards that we set for those water bodies in the 1972 Clean Water Act, and they were supposed to be met in the mid-1980s, and we still haven't done that. We still have serious air problems, with serious problems with our overconsumption of energy resources, and we're, in population terms, we're the second largest in absolute terms growth in the world. So here's one overall measure of the problem. All that we really have to do to destroy the planet for our grandchildren, my grandchildren, and I'm proud to say I've got some now, and I love them dearly, but I deeply worry about them, because if we just keep degrading our natural systems, releasing toxics, releasing greenhouse gases, not increasing them, but just at the rate that we're doing those things today, we will ruin the planet for our grandchildren. And yet we know that that's not what's going to happen. We know that we have this enormous surge of economic growth, temporarily pausing perhaps, but certainly has been enormous. It took all of history to grow the $7 trillion world economy of 1950 when I was a little boy. How long do you think it takes to add another $7 trillion to the world economy now? From all of history to less than a decade now. The world economy is, if you look at the average growth rate of the world economy over the past decade, it should double within less than 20 years in size. So, and quadruple by mid-century. So there's a huge forward momentum of this uncontrolled economy, which among the many things that it does offer is an enormous potential for further environmental deterioration far beyond what we are doing today. So I would argue that this constitutes, this pattern constitutes a severe indictment of the system of political economy in which we are operating today. And the largest and most threatening of the impacts come from those of us in the advanced industrial economies. Certainly the increasingly prosperous economies of Asia are contributing also. And this activity is consuming vast quantities of resources, occupying vast stretches of the land, and releasing vast quantities of pollutants back into the environment. And so I think the fundamental question for us on an environmental issue becomes, how can we change the operating system of the modern world economy so that it is environmentally protective and restorative, and do so quickly. And of course, that system of political economy that is our operating system is today's capitalism, or perhaps a variety of capitalisms. Not the capitalism of the textbook, but the capitalism of the street, the capitalism that we know and have today. And the inherent in the dynamics of this capitalism is a powerful and well-understood drive to earn profits, to invest those profits, to innovate, and to grow the economy, typically at exponential rates, with the result that we have had a huge spurt of exponential growth, for example, since World War II. So what are the key features of this system of political economy, this contemporary capitalism, that make it so destructive of environment? First, a society-wide commitment to growth at any cost. When Bush wanted to abandon the Kyoto Protocol, he merely said it will hurt the economy. And we will see a recurrence of these issues as Congress now turns again to the climate issue. Secondly, a powerful corporate interest whose overriding objective is to grow by generating profits, including the profits that are very large from avoiding the environmental costs that those companies create. Thirdly, continued profit-driven investment in technologies that were originally designed with little attention to the environment. The fourth, markets that systematically fail to recognize environmental costs unless required to do so by governments. and governments that basically are very much in the control of the very corporations and sources of power that need to be regulated. And now the economic activity of this system is so large that it's creating pressures on the environment that rival the scale of the natural systems which govern the planet. So we live in a world where economic growth is almost always seen as beneficent and necessary, the more the better, where this growth has now brought us to a perilous state environmentally, where we're poised for unprecedented increments of growth, and where this growth is proceeding fundamentally out of control from an environmental point of view because it's running on market signals that don't take environmental costs into account. Where a failed politics is not meaningfully corrected, the market's obliviousness to the environmental needs, and where there's no hidden hand or inherent mechanism that is in play that's going to correct this system. So right now we have is an economy and an environment that are very much in collision. So where do folks like me who worked in this area, what conclusions do I come to as an environmentalist having worked in this area now for some decades? Well, basically we opted to work within the system. We opted to raise public awareness of issues, to frame wonkish policy proposals, to intervene in the system, to correct those problems, to lobby to get those ideas adopted, to litigate to get them enforced. And that's what my life has been, for the most part, for 4 decades, and the life of many of our outstanding environmental groups. We've now run a 40-year experiment on whether that approach works. And I think we have to be honest that it doesn't work. The full burden of managing these accumulating environmental threats has fallen on people, environmentally inclined people in government and outside of government, and what we now know is that that burden is too great. The system of modern capitalism gets stronger and larger faster than we get stronger and larger, and we are sliding away, and to the point that we're on the verge of a genuine peril on the environmental issue, both particularly when we look at the climate issue, but there are other issues, water and loss of ecosystem services and biodiversity that rival it in seriousness. So my bottom line conclusion about this is that we've opted to work within the system and it's failing, and we will continue to fail unless we recognize that we've got to step outside of that system and change the system itself. And that's the fundamental challenge that I think we face today. How do we change the system? Well, here's some prescriptions that I would like to offer. I think first we've got to get the market straightened out. And that means that we've got to get prices that really implement the polluter pays principle, that really force the internalization of these environmental costs that companies and others impose on the environment. And just as important, to eliminate the massive amounts of perverse subsidies that further distort the prices in the economy. This means that the overall price level is going to have to be higher. It means that the price of many things that we do, including, I'm sad to say, eating out and taking nice vacations, some of the most destructive things that you can do, the prices of these things are going to have to be a lot higher in proportion to the environmental damage that they do. And yet we don't face up to that. Even in the heat of the campaign, well, maybe in the heat of the campaign, we heard a lot about getting gasoline prices back down for the American people. The Time magazine ran an interesting article about all of the positive things that in fact were coming out of $4 gas, but it didn't have much political resonance. But the problem with high prices is not that they're high, but that people don't have enough money to pay them, and that we don't have alternatives to the things that are expensive. So we need to correct those things and make the market work for the environment and start talking about those issues. Secondly, we've also, I think, got to address this issue of the motivational structure of the corporation. There's a wonderful group working out of Boston called Corporation 2020. They're looking at these issues of how we charter corporations, the dynamics that affect corporate behavior. But one bottom line conclusion of their work is that we will need to shift if we want to have corporations that are going to be sustaining of human and natural communities. That we will need to shift from stakeholder primacy from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy, so that in the governing structure of the corporation, in the motivational structure of the corporation, and the benefit structure of the corporation, all of the stakeholders that are affected and interested, have a long-term interest in the corporation, share. But I don't want to talk much about the market or the corporation with you today. I want to deal with two more controversial issues, I think, and talk about our growth fetish and our hyperventilating lifestyles. This never-ending drive to grow the overall economy can undermine our families, our jobs, our communities, certainly the environment, our sense of place and continuity, and even mental health, because in the end, it's always asserted that growth is good for us and somehow we'll all be better off, the more the better. But there's now good evidence, I submit, that this is not so, at least in the well-to-do countries. It turns out that if you could add up all of the costs of extra amounts of economic growth today, we might well find that those costs exceed the benefits if you could actually monetize all of the social and environmental and other costs. And I think my friend Herman Daly has created a wonderful phrase for this. He calls it uneconomic growth. We've also seen a huge amount of research coming out of this new field of positive psychology, which looks at the relationship between, among other things, that the relationship between economic status and sense of well-being, sense of happiness, sense of satisfaction with life, and basically finds that above $10,000 or so per capita, new extra money, extra consumption doesn't lead to lasting improvements in human happiness and satisfaction with life. So in the end, I think what we've got to modify is this overriding commitment to aggregate economic growth, mere GDP growth. It's consuming environmental and social capital at very high rates, and both are now in short supply. What we should be moving to is a post-growth society where the conditions of employment and working life, where the natural environment and our communities and the public sector are all no longer sacrificed for mere GDP growth, and where the illusory promises of ever more growth no longer provide us with an excuse for failing to deal generously with very compelling social needs. Indeed, I want to give you a list of things that I think would slow growth, but would actually lead to an improvement in well-being. Certainly measures such as more leisure time. We work in the United States, have longest working hours among all the OECD countries. Greater labor protections and job security and benefits. Tight restrictions on advertising. New ground rules for corporations, which I mentioned a moment ago. Strong social and environmental provisions and trade agreements. Rigorous environmental and consumer protection, including climate action. Greater economic and social equality, including a genuinely progressive income tax and greater income support for the poor. Spending major amounts of funds on public sector services and environmental amenities, and a huge investment in education and new technologies that we need, and incentives to create an awareness of our own population pressures in our country. all of those things, I submit, are people campaign against these things because they would slow up our growth. There are fights in Europe now to do away with the protections that labor has and the longer vacations and shorter work weeks. These things would not only slow growth but improve our lives. So a post-growth society shouldn't be a stagnant one. It's got to include dynamic initiatives that recognize the real sources of human well-beings. And we've got to get away from this idea that mere GDP growth is the real measure of our progress. I would argue that it's a counterproductive focus, a counterproductive way to try to generate real solutions to our social needs. How long have we heard that we need to have all this growth or we will have to face the redistribution issue in our society? And the truth is that we do need to face the redistribution issue in our society, and we pursue this endless amount of very destructive growth in lieu of dealing with that issue, which does not get any better as a result of all the growth that we've had in recent decades. So this endless pursuit actually deflects us away from the real problems. And I think we need to deal with our real issues directly, generously. We need measures that can strengthen our families and our communities, address the breakdown of social capital in our country. Robert Putnam and others have looked at one of the recent conclusions is that a third of Americans have no one to go to talk to if they have a serious problem. Measures that guarantee good, well-paying jobs, including green-collar ones, universal health care, measures that ensure a better, good education, provide care and companionship for the chronically ill, the incapacitated, measures that really put the U.S. on line to do something about the half of humanity that lives on less than $2 a day. So there are a lot of things that we need to be growing, and we should concentrate our efforts in those areas, concentrate our policies there. But if you raise a lot of the issues that I just talked about in the councils of our environmental groups today, what you will be met with is the argument that those are perhaps important social issues, but they're not environmental issues. And my point back to them is that these are clearly environmental issues because they're part of the alternative path that we need to be on rather than the one that we're on today. Over time, if we implemented all the measures that I talk about in the book, we might move to a steady state economy, not a failing economy, but one where declining labor force was met with, equated with, accompanied by increased productivity in the labor force so that incomes and outputs would stay about the same. And if you actually look back at the long string of the world's great economists, you'll find that they saw an end to this endless stream of growth, going back to certainly John Stuart Mill and Lord Maynard Keynes and Galbraith and all the others. Indeed, Mill wrote a long time ago that a steady state economy would still offer as much scope as ever for all kinds of mental culture and moral and social progress, and as much room for improving the art of living, and even more likelihood that it would be improved. So a parallel objective to this is to move away from those hyperventilating lifestyles I mentioned a moment ago. The environmentalists have not been willing to focus on consumption very much. They have not been willing to challenge Americans to move to a different lifestyle. But I think it's been a big mistake to take this position. And the costs of our extravagant and wasteful consumption patterns are enormous. And I think people understand that there's something wrong with this society in their better moments. And when you go to take polls, you find things like, in one survey, 83% of Americans say our society is not focused on the right priorities. 81% say America is too focused on shopping and spending. 88% think that society is too materialistic. And even if those numbers are only half right, that's a huge base on which to build change. I mentioned these studies from our positive psychologists which show basically that this materialism, the more materialistic you are, the less happy you are. And that all of our possessions don't lead to a better sense of personal well-being or greater satisfaction with our life. And that what indeed makes people happy and better satisfied are warm personal relationships and increasingly giving rather than getting. I saw a funny thing. There was a revolutionary new product trying to make it in the marketplace. Nothing. It's guaranteed not to put you in debt. The 100% non-toxic, sweatshop free, zero waste, doesn't contribute to global warming, family friendly, fun and creative. And there was a group of women tried to sell nothing in one of the great malls of the Midwest and were arrested. So there are a lot of people trying to fight back against this commercialism and consumerism today. Not nearly enough, but they're saying to us, fight consumption, practice sufficiency, create social environments where overconsumption is viewed as ostentatious and wasteful, create commercial-free zones. I think we just had Buy Nothing Day. Buy local, eat slow food, simplify your life. And these are the directions that we got it working. Well, we'll come back to that. So what I've tried to do so far is to present the environmental issues, what we are going to have to do to deal with our environmental concerns. Challenge the corporation, challenge consumerism, challenge the kind of capitalism that we have today, challenge the way the market is failing us. So you have to ask, well, those are pretty far-reaching things. What might possibly make these kinds of prescriptions palatable and perhaps even inevitable in our society? If I had to guess, if I had to pull together a scenario in which somehow these ideas become more available politically to us, I would say that the first thing we need is a sense of how serious the crisis of the environment really is. How serious the sense of imminent crisis. And it's very real if you read the literature on the climate issue, for example. I mean, we've known about it for decades, but we've reached the point now, by neglecting it, that we have no more time to take very drastic action. There is a real crisis out there. If we had a generalized sense of imminent crisis occurring in a time of wise leadership, leaders that can articulate where we need to go in our society, drawing on the best and our highest aspirations and the best traditions of the country and pointing out where we needed to go in the future. If this were all occurring at a time when we were seeing the development of a major grassroots movement for change in our country coming out of young people and the religious communities and many other segments of society, and we were seeing a proliferation of examples around the country of people taking an alternative approach, examples like those that are in Garl Perowitz's book, Beyond Capitalism, and William Greider's book, The Soul of Capitalism. And if all this were coming together, there's some hope, I think, that it could provide the momentum for real change. But nothing's going to happen unless we have a new environmental politics. And I think the key thing is for the environmentalists to join with other social progressives that are addressing our social needs in the country and the crisis of inequality that is now unraveling our social fabric and undermining our democracy. As you know, it's a crisis of soaring executive pay, huge incomes, increasingly concentrated wealth for a small minority, occurring simultaneously in our country with poverty near a 30-year high, stagnant wages despite rising productivity, declining social mobility and opportunity, record levels of people without health insurance, failing schools, swelling jails, shrinking safety nets, this vast social insecurity in our country, where literally half the families just get by, is one in which environmental issues will routinely fail. When people are scared for their future and worried to death about their economic security, the environmental priority fades, and that is in fact exactly what we're seeing today in Washington, and hopefully our new administration will resist that. I think environmentalists have also got to join with those that are seeking to reform our politics and to strengthen our democracy. Here's what America's senior political scientist, Bob Dahl, had to say recently. He concluded that it's highly plausible that powerful international and domestic forces could push us towards an irreversible level of political inequality that so greatly impairs our present democratic institutions as to render the ideals of democracy and political equality virtually irrelevant. What we're seeing, if you look at studies that have been done here and sponsored by Russell Sage Foundation and others, what we're seeing is the emergence of a vicious cycle. The income disparities are shifting political access and political influence to the wealthy constituencies and to large businesses, and that further imperils the potential of the democratic process to correct those income inequalities in the first place. So here's my list of new environmental issues for our environmental community. Public finance of elections, regulation of lobbying, nonpartisan congressional redistricting, easy voter registration, doing away with the Electoral College, and the list goes on. So I think I can summarize this message in a paragraph. We've created a very large and rapidly growing economic machine. It cares profoundly about profits and growth, and it cares about society and the natural world in which it operates only to the extent that it's required to do so. And it's up to us to inject values of sustainability and justice and fairness into this system, and government is the primary vehicle that we have for doing that. And it's our job as citizens to do it, but mainly we fail at it today because our politics are so enfeebled and the resistance of vested interest is so strong. So I think the best hope for real change that we have is this grassroots movement and is a fusion of those that are concerned in our country about environmental sustainability, social justice, and political democracy into one huge progressive force for change. And right now we're all too much in our own silos, communities that aren't communicating, and yet we will all rise or fall together. Thank you very much.
Gus, thank you very much. Do you want to explain this and then take some questions? Since we finally got it to work?
It might take a second to go through it. These are these are 250 years, if you can't, that's 250 years. And up top we have population, real GDP, foreign investment, damming of rivers, water use, fertilizer, urbanization, paper, McDonald's restaurants, motor vehicles. There's another one. Go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? There you go. They all look about the same because they're all driven by the growth of the economy. The top three are three greenhouse gases. the coastal flooding, decline of the oceans, and so on. Loss of biodiversity. This is, I mean, there's nothing stopping this now. I mean, that's the track we're on. It's just going right to hell. And we're doing it. And so whether you like all of the prescriptions that I talked about or not, we've got to figure out how to turn those curves down. Because this is the end for our grandchildren. Yes, sir.
Is there a document that indicates who should do what by when? You mentioned, for instance, two objectives about shifting from fast food to slow food and fewer vacations. You indicated toward the end a need for nonpartisan reapportionment, public finance campaigns. Can you fill in some of the blanks? Who should do what?
Well, you know, I think we have to live in two worlds right now. I'm not going to answer that precise question, I don't think, because something else is preliminary to that. We have urgent problems like the climate issue before us. We've got to deal with that issue with the tools that we have at hand, with the politics that we have at hand, with the people and the organizations that we have at hand, because the issue is so urgent, and several of these issues are that urgent, and they need to be dealt with what we've got today. So that's where our existing environmental groups come in, and bigger constituencies have to be built to get that job done. But at the same time, I think we've got to begin to legitimize discussion of these deeper issues, of the type of capitalism that we have, of consumerism, of the values that dominate in our society, of the power of the corporate sector and the way the corporation is set up motivationally today, which is basically, there's a wonderful documentary that's been done based on the book The Corporation. I don't know if you've seen it, but the documentary is called The Corporation, but they identify the characteristics of the psychopathic personality. To begin with, about 10 characteristics of the psychopathic personality, and then they go through systematically showing that, in fact, this is a pretty good description of the motivational structure of today's corporations. And so all of these deeper issues, but right now these issues almost have political immunity, right? We don't talk about them, we don't hear much about them, and yet, so my first answer is to deal with these deeper issues. We've got to build, a basic vocabulary and an approach to talking about these issues and bringing them into public discourse, bringing them into the mainstream discourse, so we can begin to line up what we need to do and who needs to do what more precisely. Can I show you this one, a couple other things? Keep going. Skip all this, skip all that. Here, go back one. This is this is basically subjective well-being, and this is income level. Those dots are countries, and what you see is that you get above about $10,000, as I was mentioning. Basically, there's no real correlation out there. And in fact, there's some people who believe this isn't a real correlation with regard to income. It's more of a correlation that has to do with the political situation in these countries. A lot of these are former Soviet Union countries. The next slide, please. And then this is the last one. These are the United States, United Kingdom, Japan. This is years, and this is well-being and per capita income. So what you see is that in all three countries, per capita income has been going up, but the level of life satisfaction, of happiness, very happy people, is flatlined. Yes?
From your research, what is the most benign place for society to look for its energy resources in the years ahead? In particular, have you looked into the proposals of Gerard O'Neill and Peter for getting solar power and resources from space?
We started doing really sophisticated analyses of what it would take to move to what was at one point called a soft energy path and to an environmentally and socially supportive energy path. We started doing it back in the early 70s. You could fill this room now with really good analyses that have been done in those decades on what we ought to be doing on the energy front. And now there's a new wave of these studies, and people are looking more intensively. And it looks like that some of the things that people had been talking about all those decades now are finally beginning to get some traction. The one that's not getting much traction or attention, at least in the public discourse or from federal money, is probably the most benign of all, which is to move rapidly to precise energy use, to dramatic increases in our energy efficiency, in the energy productivity. There's just we are so wasteful in how we use energy today that is a huge supply for the future. The biggest and the cheapest by far, I think. Then, wind is taking off. With the huge wind investments are occurring here and around the world. The U.S. has now, I think, gotten to be the largest wind producer. And they are coming on strong. Behind that are photovoltaic electricity possibilities. The prices of solar cells are coming down dramatically. With a little subsidy, you can put them on your roof. We're building a new building at Yale that's going to be super green, and we're putting solar cells on the roof, a huge photovoltaic display on the roof, and dramatically increase the space conditioning in the building with ground source heat pumps. But I think you're asking probably, correct me if I'm wrong, about some of the more exotic proposals that have been offered, including collecting solar energy in outer space and using microwaves to beam it back down to Earth to particular sites. And that, I think we need to do a lot of R&D on future energy possibilities. But the people who claim that we don't have enough technology to deal today with the climate issue are wrong. And a lot of studies have been done to show that, in fact, with off-the-shelf, fairly or readily available technologies, we can deal for decades now, certainly with the climate issue. But in that time, things are going to change, and there will be new technologies and new opportunities. Yeah.
I actually work at the UN now, so I was just interested that was in your background. I was wondering.
Where?
I work in DESA.
Okay.
In DC1. Anyways, I was wondering if you had any expectations about...
That's the Department of Economic and Social Affairs.
Yes. We just did our meeting last year on sustainable development, so this is obviously a big issue for us. I was wondering what your expectations were for the new meeting in Copenhagen next year for the post-Kyoto. I know I've been studying Kyoto quite a bit and the development mechanisms that do have green... So what do you think is obviously this is an international issue, what is going to be this next system, and what would be the recommendations for an international response to this type of a problem?
Well, I think there are two basic core issues that have to be resolved at Copenhagen in a year. One is what's going to be the international commitment, the goals that are set, the caps that are put on greenhouse gas emissions. They will be disturbing to a lot of people because the phase down of these emissions and phase down of our fossil fuel use is going to be rather striking, whether it's 80% by 2050 or something stronger eventually. But I think that's one. And then second big issue is who's going to join and how can incentives be created so that the developing world gets on board this time. And we didn't have that with Kyoto. We still don't have a magic formula for it. But the Chinese, for example, have said if the so-called donor countries, I started calling them the so-called donor countries when I was in the UN, if they would put up 1% of GDP to help pave the way for them to do the right things and to provide the right technologies, that would be the type of incentive that could really take China and India off of the paths that they're on today. It's really not that much, certainly not to save the planet. We're already supposed to be contributing 0.7% just in normal official development assistance. And we're not doing it, but there are many countries, not many, a handful of countries that do that. And so this is not given what's at stake, this is not a high price, in my view. And I think, so those are certainly two big issues. There are a lot of more detailed issues that have to be sorted out at Copenhagen and in subsequent meetings. And how can you make the system enforceable? And one article which I would refer you to is a recent study by the political scientist Robert Cohen, who has a very elegant sort of approach to how to make the system work. Basically a cap and trade program, but how do you make it work? So anyhow, there are a lot of issues. And there's also the issue, a very important issue politically to watch, is how do you phase in the U.S. action with the international action? Should the U.S., are people going to expect the U.S. to have acted by the time of Copenhagen and to have put in place our own national cap and trade program, for example? And that's the tall order. And so one thought is that maybe we could have the proposal go forward to the Congress from the administration on a major cap and trade program, and that could, and with lots of indications that was, we were going to get that done, and then go to Copenhagen and see what happens there, come back, learn from the Copenhagen process, and pass our national legislation in the second year of the Obama administration. There are many possibilities for the phasing of all of that, but both the two things will be linked. I think the Europeans did an analysis of the, in effect, the greenhouse gas emissions that were offshored to the developing countries by Europe, in effect, embodied in imports that were coming into Europe, and it was like 18 to 20% increase over Europe's measured and reported greenhouse gas emissions, were in fact the result of sending things to China to manufacture, for example. And I figure the U.S. statistic is probably as high, maybe higher. So these kinds of things, what you're raising, if I can generalize it a little bit, is something I think is fundamentally important. We have got to get away from the tyranny of this current system of national accounts. And there is a lot going on out there now to try to evolve different systems of measuring. You can do subjective measures of well-being, and there's a community of positive psychologists that's trying to urge our country and other countries to develop a system of systematically measuring well-being, subjective well-being, and what affects subjective well-being. There are other measures that look at objective well-being and try to develop a system for that. We did that in the UN with the Human Development Index and the other indices that we developed. But that could continue to be improved. Then there are systems that try to monetize everything, that try to monetize and to correct GDP so that it really is a measure of welfare. And what those systems tend to show, is there another, could we see another slide? Is this basically an indicator of sustainable economic welfare? And this is U.S. and Australia, Germany, Netherlands, UK, Sweden. And what they all show is that what they're measuring is GDP in the dark line, per capita going up, and then this measure of sustainable welfare, which is a corrected, monetized GDP, but it's been corrected so that, you don't, GDP can go up if you destroy all your resources, but your welfare actually goes down. And if you have more car accidents and have to buy more cars, GDP goes up. It tries to correct for these defensive and destructive expenditures in this modified measure. And what it shows is that they are going along, in almost all cases, the two are tracking each other up until, in all these countries, up until about 1970 or so. And then GDP keeps going up, but real welfare as measured in dollars and cents flatlines out or begins to decline. It's quite interesting. These studies were done by different people, mostly different times, that they tried to use a comparable methodology in doing it. Could I see the next slide? And here it is for the U.S. In the U.S., the people who do this call it the genuine progress indicator. And you know, gross domestic product per capita is going up, but this measure of monetized welfare in the country is flatlined also. And you know, you could say, oh, well, this is a lot of arbitrary decisions that have gone into that. But the truth is, a lot of arbitrary decisions have gone into GDP also. And these people are sincere, honest people with, you know, a transparent methodology, and you can disagree with it, but that's it. And it's, you know, probably pretty accurate in my judgment. Yes, in the back?
Would you agree with Al Gore's recent, a very alluring suggestion regarding civil disobedience?
Rebirth of activism in the U.S. And you know, and in my judgment, we ought to be, you know, taking almost all forms of that to make these points. It was quite interesting that I think Gore's comment was stimulated by a trial that was held in the United Kingdom, where a group of activists who broke the law were put on trial, and they were protesting, as is happening in the U.S. now with more and more frequency, trying to stop new coal plants from being constructed. And I think that's what the issue in the UK was. And some of our, at least one of our major climate scientists, Jim Hansen, in effect testified or submitted a brief, I don't know exactly which, in that case in defense of the protesters, and the jury found them innocent. And I think, you know, in general, I think we, you know, one day soon, I would predict there's going to be a very large appearance of people in the city of Washington demanding action, and certainly if Congress shows any sign of hesitation on the climate issue, there's Well, I think we need you know, I'm afraid I'm a child of the 60s, and I really think that we need a rebirth of activism in the U.S. And, you know, and in my judgment, we ought to be, you know, taking almost all forms of that to make these points. It was quite interesting that I think Gore's comment was stimulated by a trial that was held in the United Kingdom, where a group of activists who broke the law were put on trial, and they were protesting, as is happening in the U.S. now with more and more frequency, trying to stop new coal plants from being constructed. And I think that's what the issue in the UK was. And some of our, at least one of our major climate scientists, Jim Hansen, in effect testified or submitted a brief, I don't know exactly which, in that case in defense of the protesters, and the jury found them innocent. And I think, in general, I think one day soon, I would predict there's going to be a very large appearance of people in the city of Washington demanding action, and certainly if Congress shows any sign of hesitation on the climate issue, there's going to be a huge turnout in Washington, a huge protest, a huge demand for action, and I think if I'm at the point personally of sufficient frustration on this issue after all this time that I think that we probably do need instant examples of civil disobedience if necessary to make the point of how serious this issue is. I have no problem with that. And if there's a model in our memories of what this issue is going to take to win, and I don't just mean getting the first action through Congress, but winning the big battle and dealing with our social issues, it is, in my judgment, the civil rights movement, which knew what it was trying to get and knew that the system that they were operating in was destructive and illegitimate,